Today, I'm really excited to have Andrew O on the podcast. Andrew is one of the industry leaders in product management. He started his career doing startups like Mint Ultimate, Bambify, and Super Air Taxi. From there, he joined Grab as a senior product manager on their trust and safety team before joining ByteDance as a product manager, which is the parent of TikTok. He then decided to create Social City, a mobile application that allowed users to find new people to hang out with in their city. Soon after, Andrew decided to pursue new opportunities. Outside of these positions, Andrew has also worked as a speaker at Product School and a coach at Exponent. Having people like Andrew on the podcast is amazing because you get to find really great stories about working in the industry, as well as learn the methodology of creating great products from product leaders. With that said, I hope you enjoy the podcast. Hello, Andrew, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, for sure. So, let's get into it. What brought you initially towards product management?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So basically, I was a founder first. So I did 3 startups over 5 years, 1 exit, 2 losses. And essentially, after a pretty good run there, I was looking towards Asia and wanted to work at a bigger company. And I think at that point, because I was doing product management more informally as a founder, and was doing all the activities that one would normally go through, without having so much the formal structure or training. At the time, I was actually looking for 3 different roles that could help me go back to being a founder eventually. One was growth, second was operations, and third was product management. And at the time, I didn't actually know much about product management whatsoever. But my friend said, "Hey, look, product management is basically what you've been doing as a founder, just at a bigger company." So when I was interviewing for all 3, mind you, I still had a pretty shallow understanding of what it actually was. I had tended to just excel in those interviews, and maybe that was due to my founder background. Maybe that was fate. And so the role I ended up landing was actually product management at Grab. So, and for those of you who don't know, Grab is actually it's the Uber of Southeast Asia. So they do ride hailing, delivery, parcel delivery, and they're trying to be a super app within Southeast Asia by going to fintech as well. So I joined Grab back in 2018, and that's how I got my career started as a product manager. And I got to say, about 2 months into the job, it was everything that I did not expect. So I went back to my friends. I'm like, "You guys lied to me. This is not what it's like to be a founder whatsoever." But it ended up being a really good fit nonetheless. So I stuck with it.
Okay. Well, I definitely want to get some more clarity on that. What the biggest differences you saw there in a bit. But I guess, first talking about, you alluded to how you started with startups and then you ended up going to big corporations. So, when you compare both of those times, what do you think the biggest differences you saw were?
Yeah, here's a major difference and the major drawback, right? As from being a product manager versus a founder. Um, as a product manager, you are solely responsible for just building that product, right? And now let's be real. About 90 to 95% of all the positions as a product manager that's out there is you managing a product that already has product market fit and some level of scale. You as a founder are trying to build something from 0 to 1, of which you are not only responsible for delivering the product to launch it, you are also responsible for growth of that product and operations and marketing and everything else, of which a product manager has 0 experience doing and has 0 say in doing in the actual job itself. And so that's where I alluded to being a little bit misguided by my friends when I actually got into the role. But in addition to that, product is also just very, very different. Because as a founder, you're not constrained per se to like a quarterly roadmap. You're not constrained to a specific timeline. Like you will find product market fit, you will iterate, you can take risks, and you're the one calling the shots. But as a PM, they say, a lot of companies say that they embrace failure and mistakes that people make. The reality is that is 100% not the case. You have your performance reviews that come up on a 6-month basis, and you get judged really hard on those mistakes that you make, those bets that you want to take. And all it takes is one no from your designer or your engineer or your leaders to also shut down an idea that you have. So the whole premise and concept of it is very different. The skill set's very different. The structure is very different. Um, and one common pattern that I have seen is that people who are founders first and then go into product management and then come out of it tend to be more successful in terms of being founders. However, if you start as a PM and you go to being a founder, expecting since you know how to build a product that you're going to win, usually that's not the case. And it's not the case because these PMs, as I mentioned before, they work on products that already have product market fit, and so they themselves don't know how to do it. And it's a very, very long, tedious process to even learn it, and you have to learn it through most of the time failure.
Right.
So those are kind of like maybe some of the key differences that I've noticed among the two.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think, one of the, like, even within product management, I think one of the biggest differences I've seen is when you're at a smaller organization versus a big one, just the amount of review cycles you can have on a decision is immensely different. And then when you're a founder, that's a whole different level because, as a product manager, yes, if you make a wrong decision, it can really impact you, but it's nowhere near the level of what making a wrong decision as a founder can be. So definitely having that, risk, appetite for risk, and also having that pressure. I think as a product manager, you do have pressure, but it's a whole nother level as a founder.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
For sure. So, you mentioned that, you went to Grab and you've been to ByteDance and you've gone to several different companies now. So I was just wondering, when it comes to pursuing what's next, I know you also flipped from product management to startup. So what has been your decision-making process in choosing your next journey or your next step?
Yeah, definitely. So, um, first, let me say that my goals have shifted from time to time over the last 4 years, but I think it's more so been quite consistent. So back in 2018, when I left being a founder to join a more established startup or company, at the time I simply wanted to gain the skills um, that would help benefit me to going back to being a successful founder. That was really it.
Mhm.
And so I joined Grab for that reason. Um, and then later on, I also joined ByteDance for that same reason, aka TikTok. And so with ByteDance, it's a little bit different because after my stint at Grab, after 2 years of working on the trust and safety team to reduce the fraud rate, of which we were able to accomplish quite well, I joined ByteDance as a founding PM, working on a Workday competitor. And my scope was specifically overseeing the new employee onboarding portal, um, of which we all know Workday uh, has a pretty horrendous experience that
Right.
has a lot of room for improvement.
Mhm.
And so, but that's not exactly the reason why I went. It wasn't really so much the scope, although I really loved the company culture, despite what others in the community have to say about it. For me specifically, I had one goal in mind, and again, it was to go back to being a founder. So my goal there were really two things. First, I wanted to really understand how ByteDance creates products,
Right.
launches it, and grows it, because there's some magic sauce here where they're able to be very, very successful with a whole slew of products that they've launched over the last 10 years. And when I look back at Google and Facebook and other big tech companies, I just have not seen almost any slew of success for any products that they've launched in-house.
Right.
It's always been some sort of like acquisition. Um, so there was some magic there that I wanted to learn. And the second thing I was looking to learn at ByteDance was getting to know the real story of Douyin, aka like what TikTok now is as it expanded into the States and the rest of the world. Um, because when I looked at the CEO, Yiming, I knew that guy was definitely not the founder of Douyin, of TikTok. And I know, a lot of people say that Alex Su, founder of Musically, is the founder of TikTok, because his startup got acquired. But I personally don't believe that's the case, because his app got basically transformed all into what Douyin is back in China. And really, it's that UX that succeeded. It's that
Right.
strategy that succeeded. Um, so I knew that's not Alex Su, or didn't consider him the real founder. I know it's definitely not Yiming, the CEO or the former CEO of ByteDance. So I knew that if I can go into this company, I can go search for this guy.
Right.
So essentially, and this is kind of like an off the cuff story, but essentially what happened was I joined the company, And about 2 months in or 3 months in, I'm like, okay, it's probably time for me to try to go find this person. So I just posted in one of the public channels. I was like, hey, does anyone know who the true founder of Douyin is? Because I don't think it's Alex Zhu, and I would really like to know who it is.
Right.
And no one had any idea, and that was a bit puzzling to me. And then after a little bit more effort on my channel of trying to get out an answer, I had HR actually ping me directly, and they said we don't share his name because of of certain reasons, and a lot of that was actually due to political reasons at the time when Trump
Right.
was trying to I believe what was it? Was it the elections? Anyways, all I remember was that there were elections going on.
Okay.
TikTok was still being demonized by the states,
Right.
and they just got banned in India. So they were trying to kind of like paint this Americanized, Westernized, like roots app of TikTok, and so any affiliation with the Chinese counterpart of it, they were trying to avoid, and not get that out internally because that would definitely seep out externally.
Right.
And so for me, yeah, I essentially like told them the situation. I'm like, I like one of the biggest reasons why I joined this company was actually just to get to meet this guy.
Yeah.
I would keep under wraps my whole conversation with this person, but it'd be great if you could actually just connect me and, would love to just have a sit down with the guy and really learn his story. So I made a deal with HR that if they told me his name, I would not share it, and then I can have my interview with him. So
Oh, okay.
they gave me the guy's name. Yeah, they gave me the guy's name, and obviously he sits in China. I won't say the name of the podcast just out of respect on the deal that I had. But it was during COVID, and it was I think now the beginning of 2021, and I always had this plan in my head of like going to China one day on a business trip. Finding this guy's desk, going up to him and saying, "Hey man, my name's Andrew. I just wanted to let you know that I joined this company just to learn your
Just to meet
story.
you.
So you owe me dinner."
Right.
Yeah. But then as COVID and Delta, had come out and whatnot, and it seemed like business travel was really not going to happen, especially for China, anytime soon. It wasn't really that, but it was actually the fact that I realized, wait, this guy might not actually speak English. That I then realized
Right.
I need to change my plan. Yeah. So that's when I changed my plan, and I decided, you know what, I might as I'm just gonna go ping this guy on the internal chat. So I pinged him. I saw he read the message, and then he came back and responded an hour later saying, "Hey, I'm sorry, my English is not good. I actually got my assistant to write this message. I'm happy to sit down with you and tell you about my story and how Doing really got started." So I kind of got this untold story of how Doyen really got started, which is, I think already the biggest threat to Facebook. But in my opinion, it's really going to be the next dominant social app over the next 10 years
Oh my
of the
God.
generation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's one of the most wild stories I've ever heard, and it's actually crazy that you got to meet the guy. Like I was expecting them to
Yeah.
go, oh, like I couldn't end up meeting him, but that's crazy. That's wow. Wow. I'm really speechless. That's an insane story.
Yeah. What I will tell you is this, to everyone's surprise, right? This guy had zero product management experience.
Okay.
And not only that, actually, he came from an operations background. And he made this with nothing but a few operation interns, fresh out of school engineers, a really small team. I think it was only like 10 or 15 people total. And yeah, and then he ended up making like what is now like the biggest app today in social, that's just crushing it in the market. So and when I talk to him, like you can see it. You can see his grit, his tenacity, his experience, and like
Right.
from that conversation, I walked away thinking this is like the top. And I've met a lot of founders in my life, and he is definitely like the top 3 founder I've met.
Right.
I've encountered, and again, he's someone that didn't exactly come from a product background whatsoever, but he had all the characteristics and skill sets that a founder would have.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I guess that probably really solidified your thesis there about how product management and founders aren't, they have very different skill sets. If you're saying this guy came from operations, he wasn't even in engineering then. Like he was strictly off, something completely different.
Yeah, that's right. He didn't know how to write a line of code.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, I'm not sure how to follow this up, but but moving on to the next question, so you have a lot of experience creating startups and products from the ground up. And so specifically getting into some of your startup experience, but can be a little bit in product management as well. What was your methodology for identifying problems that needed to be solved and then pursuing them to create startups or create new products?
Right. Okay. So I think I think the methodology is quite different from you being a founder versus a product manager. And again, it really depends on the structure and the team that you have in your product organization.
Mm-hmm.
So let me maybe start with corporate first. In corporate, usually there's a vision that the company has that's set by the CEO or the founder. There's usually going to be an overall company strategy that's there, that's set by the strategy team or by the CEO. And then you're going to have the product strategy. Yeah. And that product strategy is usually set at the director level. So that can be the CPO, that could be your director level product manager. And then that gets funneled down into the teams. So and that's what ultimately gets not only funneled down to the teams in terms of job scope, but also what the titles would be when they start hiring for those specific strategic segments. Right. For product. Now, basically what I'm trying to say is when you're IC or even managerial level, you almost have no say. Mm-hmm. on that piece itself. You only have that say when it comes to the table on the director level. And so your scope is very, very much confined to something. So I'll give you an example. Could be like, let's just say you work for Uber. Company strategy is already set. Product strategy for maybe like transportation is already set. Maybe they had identified that they want to go into from the product strategy side. Maybe they had identified that they can boost revenue if they do something like multi pickup and drop off. So like from that, the managers themselves, they might be confined to just validating those problem statements if it hasn't already been validated. And then like building like a roadmap and certain features are all around that specific feature. But that said, right, whether you're an IC or director level, you should have like a certain level of user centricity. Right. But the direction is already given to you. Right. Your scope is already kind of like predefined. And you have to find problems. And this is the thing about problem statements, right? You can find problem statements within that specific segment or field. But I think a lot of people tend to lose out then on the other side of things, which I think it's a very controversial view that I have. But I think it's not just about problem statements. You could just opt to make something 10x better. And I think there's a very, very clear difference between the two. Right. And unfortunately, I believe that for product managers specifically, because again, given the whole structure and process of how your performance and everything else is set up, how they always de-risk, if you're solving a real problem, that's a level of higher certainty that you're de-risking your investment at the end of the day. And that also goes for founders, right? And that's why like people are more bullish on people who are solving like, severe problems. But here's the thing. If it's really a severe problem, those severe problems are already solved. How much more can you really do to solve, that same problem or even a slight variation of it with incremental value being added on? And that's why and I'm going back to this before, like for PMs that have product market fit already with their products when they join the company or the team, it's really easy to just, build incremental value and to get rewarded with high metrics because the company already has so much scale. So I'll give an example. Maybe for the transportation of Uber, right? Maybe it's a really dumb answer to have, or it's a really easy answer to have whereby maybe you want to add cryptocurrency payments into the wallet to allow for transactions to happen, right? Right. And like it's easy to project how like what percentage of opportunity there's going to be. Maybe that could end up increasing 10% of the sales, in a certain degree because people already have cryptocurrency, and that's a lot more cash that they have in terms of them being able to have purchasing power, and you're able to make make it liquid to a certain extent through this feature. So business case is really clear. Adding another payment methodology is really easy, but that kind of what I would consider product management or incremental value, I think is kind of like missing the point.
Right.
Now let's go back to being a founder, right? So as a founder, I think it's you have a lot more flexibility. You can solve a problem, or you can more easily come up with something 10x better, and without having to convince a specific stakeholder on that.
Right.
So, if you have a specific idea, such as, let's just say you want to build an e-reader. Let's just say that you want to build an iPhone.
Yeah.
You can go ahead and just do that. And those are honestly projects that I would consider 10x better.
Right.
That's not solving a specific problem. And to me, a problem is supposed to be something that a person is actually more or less conscious of.
Right.
And it's okay if they're not fully aware of it. But let's be real. Like even things like the contact book feature of your phone, right? Before, back when we had Yellow Pages and you used to have those big phone books, sure, that was a bit of a hassle to scroll through, right? But was that ever really like a big problem? It was not blocking the end-to-end user goal. And people were honestly fine with it. So if they're fine with it, is that really a problem? I would consider if you want to make a feature on a smartphone that has just like a really easy directory, we could just type a letter and get anyone there. I would just consider that 10x better, but that's not necessarily solving a problem.
Right.
And so for features like that, right, and also that mindset, I think that's where founders really excel. Whereas for product managers, again, because of the processes and also just the very nature of de-risking investments, and also with their performance reviews having been set on like a quarterly and a 6-month basis, they're a lot more confined to be able to innovate features like that within the companies.
So I guess as a follow-up then for you, how do you go about finding those problems?
Oh, right. Sorry. Yeah. Going back to your initial question. So really there's a couple ways. To define what a problem is, you can either look at it from a business lens. So, for example, maybe with my current role at Pluang, what I might subjectively define as a problem is our business model, right? The same business model that every other crypto exchange has, crypto stock exchange, etc. Which is when the market is down, your business model, of which you get commissions off the GTV, the transactions that are generated on the platform. If the market is down and you're in a bear market, then the overall market activity for investments is also going to go down, and therefore that's going to affect your P&L directly. So it could be a business level problem. That's one lens you could look at it. The other is a user problem. So you can actually go ahead and look at other competitors. You can go ahead and talk to your users and actually just get a sense of what other issues are they facing. But the way of which you do that research has to be thought of carefully, because you can't ask leading questions. What you should be doing is just try to understand the end-to-end behavior and user behavior and the user flow to then pick out to then be able to identify specific areas of improvement or problems that they might actually be facing that they themselves are not actually aware of.
Right.
And so then you can formulate that into problem statements, come up with solutions around it, and then you can present it, and then you can get the feedback on whether or not there's some hints of product market fit signals that you would want to test further into an MVP.
Right. And so I guess, going to the next step of that. So you've identified a problem, you feel like it's something that you should start solving. What is the groundwork you set up with new product in order to see or try to optimize for success? Of course, you can't guarantee success, but try being successful.
Trying being successful. Yeah. Now I think with any feature launch, there's a couple things you have to get through. Of course, one is make sure you actually launch an end-to-end happy path flow of a product that won't break on the user. So just make sure your QA is good. Then when you finally launch it, you want to de-risk that launch as much as possible. So, for example, if you come up with a feature and you force like 100% of users to adopt it, and they don't, that ends up being feature bloat So you want to avoid a situation like this. So you want to just be really targeted with how many users and which kind of users you want to roll out that feature to. So it could be like maybe 1% of users, specifically those within the city of Toronto.
Right.
And then just kind of like see what the early metrics and data has to say about it, and then follow that up with supplemental interviews. And lastly, what really goes into the successful launch itself, once you have all of that figured out to de-risk it, it's the iteration cycles.
Right.
Because your first launch is still, for the most part, based on an assumption. You can do all the testing on Figma, prototypes, even like a really small MVP testing with the engineering team, talk to your users directly and try to get some feedback. And I've been through this time and time again, especially as a founder, right? More so as a founder than ever a PM. Where you do all that testing, you do everything right. But then when you launch it to the actual market of users that you have, your results can be very different.
Right.
For very unexpected reasons. So, and that's where you really learn, right? all the things that were not so obvious, like you end up learning that, and it becomes part of the wisdom that you gain over time. So, when you launch, you have to be very alert and aware, and oversee both the metrics and stay close to the ground to talk to users to see how they're feeling about the product.
Right.
Are they really using it? Retention to me is always the key metric when you're trying to validate product market fit. So define first what the life cycle of the product is. So if that's a daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly active usage, and then try to benchmark that to a retention rate.
Right.
Look back period.
Right.
And because users can say that they like the product, but if they're still not coming back to use it, that's a problem. So you do have to look at both. And the trick here is to iterate as quickly as possible. Right. So run your experiment, launch it, learn, iterate, get more feedback until you're eventually whittling your way all the way to product market fit eventually. And you have to be very, very clear with yourself and your team that at the end of the day, there might not actually be product market fit for this after all. Define not only the criteria for success, but also define the criteria for moving on. Right. I think that's really key.
Right. And so, as a follow-up to that, you worked at a couple different ventures now. And I think with software for sure, like it's easy to do that. But for example, for something like Super Air Taxi, which was one of the startups that you founded, it's not, at least I can't think of how it could be easy to sort of get that validation in the market. So like when you were going through that, what were some of your strategies there? What was your mindset there in trying to get that validation?
Yeah. So unfortunately, let me preface that I couldn't get a taxi off the ground. Yeah. But really, so it was really just based on user interviews more so first, okay. As well as looking at the timing of the market to see if people were overall ready for this. And I had an advisor from the Alchemist Accelerator program, who was actually instrumental in building the first drone regulations for the White House.
Okay.
And she also had her own drone startup before for medical delivery. So she's very, very experienced. We knew that the consumer demand side was ready for this, but rather is, number one, the government ready for this? And what I later on learned was the technology actually ready for this? Mm-hmm. So, I made a partnership with eHong, which is one of the world's leading flying taxi companies, producers in the world. And they themselves actually have the technology where it can go from point A to point B just fine.
Okay.
And when I went to China to go visit them and make that partnership, what was not so advertised in this entire industry is the real problem was the battery technology.
I see.
So basically, long story short, they filled batteries in every little crevice that they could of that drone to support a human being transported. But really, with the lithium battery technology that we have today, at the end of the day, you are still going to only be able to fly for 10 to 15 minutes.
Right.
And then that thing has a charge for 2 hours. The unit economics of this does not make sense at all.
Right.
I mean, it's a big drone. It's a big vehicle too, right? So you can imagine like a parking lot or even like a rooftop where you have like these vehicles going. Unit economic wise, it didn't even make sense as a business. Now, I wanted to first start trialing this actually in developing country and start with the use case of island hopping, where say a boat actually leaves only once a day. Mm-hmm. But instead you can take this like this flying taxi that can like take you across the island to another island, not only safely, but it's a really great experience for tourists to actually be able to go up and do that.
Right.
So so basically the plan initially was get 100,000 miles with no accidents, to then have a very clear operational plan of this working out, and then try to break into like a village, and then from a village to a city, and then after you've done that pilot test with developing countries, then you actually have, you know, what is a white paper of something that operationally works, that's actually safe, that's actually proven and tested, that no other drone flying taxi company is actually doing today.
Right.
Go like trying to get the what's it called, the FAA, I think it was called,
Yeah. Yeah.
the aviation
Yeah.
government regulators in the US to say yes when you have like zero evidence that this actually works.
Right. No, that's actually a really smart strategy, because I think even drones right now, like there's so many drone companies that were limited by FAA regulations until I think the last year or two, where they allowed it at nighttime, so drones can actually be viable with unit economics. So yeah, that's a really smart strategy. Is try with developing countries, island hopping. I can see some risks in terms of, especially 10 to 15 minutes on a charge. There's definitely some risks there, but I'm sure like you can find an area where you can mitigate those risks and still do it safely. So yeah, that's really
Yeah.
interesting. That would have been really cool to see, but I think it's a very big challenge, especially, and I think the technology probably has to advance a lot more to actually see that viable.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, talking more about your startup. So, one of the startups I was really interested in that you worked on was Social City, and specifically in Social City, because it's a social hangout app. Growth and acquiring users is pretty key in moving a business like that towards being profitable, and especially enticing VCs to invest, because, of course, VCs love user acquisition metrics. So, when you think about growth and with a startup like Social City, what were some of the key considerations that you factored in, and how did you make your growth strategy there?
Right. Okay. This was a pretty intense. It was a pretty intense journey, in terms of figuring that out. And I'll be honest, I still never really figured it out because of COVID reasons, that hit, which is not so good for a Hangout app.
Right.
But let me explain. So just as a recap, Social City is a casual Hangout app to make new friends.
Mhm.
So it's similar to like a Meetup.com, except we had a few key product differentiations. So number one, it was strictly for casual hangouts. So you might be at a bar, you can make a hangout, say, hey, like I'm here, anyone want to join me? Or you could plan something like a dinner 2 week, like 1 or 2 weeks in advance, and you can ask for someone to, or you can ask like a community of people to come join you. However, through iterations and testing, I did iterate the product to make it for a few rules. So one of those rules being, you can only plan 2 weeks in advance, and the the hangouts can only have up to 6 people. Anything more than 6 people is considered too big. Like you don't actually have enough time and intimacy within the group to actually really get to know one another.
Right.
In actuality, the sweet spot's really like four. Four, I would have even considered lowering the cap to four. But I was just trying to be a little bit more flexible given the early testing on the MVP that I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and likewise, when you join the Hangout itself, after you get approved by the host, you then enter a group chat, so you can casually get acquainted and get to coordinate. So those are like main differences between Meetup and us. And then also we were more app based, of course.
Right.
So in terms of the growth strategy, I first had to really identify who the target user was. Now I had a pretty good understanding of it because for me, I was trying to solve a problem that I had, which were twofold as an expat going to like a new city. One, when you go into a new city, you don't really know anyone and you're trying to build your core group of friends.
Right.
Second, when you actually have your core group of friends already established, then it's for some reason really hard for you to actually go out of that group and make new friends.
Right.
So those were the two issues that I had not only seen with myself, but pretty much every other person that I knew who was also in Singapore, San Francisco, or any other city that I've joined. And so with that, I had to really think about who this target user is. So I initially thought it was expats. I'm an expat, so maybe that made a lot of sense. So I started advertising to like Facebook groups, Reddit groups and whatnot to try to get them on board. And what I got were a lot of creeps.
Okay.
So a lot like really old people who were only just hitting on girls,
Right.
like the hottest girls on the platform, and that was not cool.
Right.
So and it was damaging the culture. So really quickly did I learn, number one, you need to be far more specific with your target user. Number two, culture is extremely important. So you have to really build that culture. Anything after one person, culture starts getting built.
Right.
It's really, really important to make sure the communities are really there. Um, and so then I had experimented and I realized that it's actually tech expats in Singapore that were really the right fit. These are
Okay.
all people who like have a similar persona, being super outgoing, serious about their careers. They have a common topic and interest, um, and yeah, and they're all really adventurous. They like to socialize. They like to travel. Hence, they're all here.
Right.
So when I focus on that, that's when the culture and the wheels really start to get going. So before you can focus on growth, you have to first focus on retention. I think I mentioned before about product market fit being really important. The key metric is retention there.
Right.
So yeah, it was doing actually pretty well. Like for the initial launch, what I had gotten was a 40% retention rate after week 5 for all the users.
Wow.
However, which is huge, by the way.
For a new app,
Usually
that's crazy.
for a new app, and I think when I looked at Lenny's newsletter, what's considered good is actually like 20 to 25%,
Yeah.
somewhere around there. If it's 40% plus, it's considered like phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, if someone had joined at least one hangout, the retention rate skyrocketed to 70% after week 5.
Wow.
So product market fit, 100% there. Problem was timing, which I know is like now more common wisdom, but I thought I was being smart with timing. So what happened was middle of last year, I quit my job at ByteDance after we launched the product in China to work on this full time. So I raised a small, very, very small pre-seed round on an 8 mil valuation to and hired a small team to work on this launch. Mind you, I like to de-risk and I like to plan ahead. So I had already validated the product market fit before I actually quit my job. And I thought I was being smart about the COVID situation because COVID at the time, everyone thought it was ending.
Right.
And Singapore was actually getting ready to open up. And then I left the job. I raised a pre-seed round. We launched in Singapore. And then I think like a month or two later, we went from 5 people gathering limit to 2 people.
Right.
And that just crushed the app. And I waited a couple months hoping that it would change, and it did not. Right. So then I made the pretty extreme decision to just move to New York. So I moved to New York in, I think, August or September of last year to grow it all over again. And then I had to rethink again who the target user is. And so, I tested with Asians, actually, like to make this an Asian hangout app. And then I want to expand it to the general community. Mm-hmm. And this is another big lesson that I learned. And this is one of those things where I mentioned before about iteration and, learning things that wouldn't have been obvious upfront. So there was great product market fit among the Asian community in New York. Mind you, I only have like a couple hundred users at this point.
Right.
The problem here was that that target segment of users had really poor growth channels.
I see.
And I will give you an example. Like I remember I went to like the Subtle Agents Facebook group. I posted this. I posted about my app. Like made a really good post with the that I co-collaborated with the creator of the group. Subtle Agent Traits, if you don't know, it's like a Facebook group that has like I think hundreds of thousands, even like probably over 1 million like Asians
big.
that are there.
It's really big.
Yeah, pretty big. Yeah, and basically, you want to know what the conversion rate was? I think 50,000 or 100,000 people saw it.
Okay.
And ultimately, it led to, of course, like in terms of the funnel, some people who then like went to the App Store links, downloaded it, signed up, and then ultimately came to a hangout. So out of 50,000 people, one person came to a hangout.
Really? Oh wow. Okay.
One person, and that's like as big as you get in this Asian community, right? Like there are other things you could try to do, which I was experimenting with, starting to experiment with, such as going to like I was gonna do partnerships with like bubble tea restaurants and whatnot in New York to try to like advertise more physical space. But really, I already learned the lesson from the Facebook group. Basically, even though there's product market fit with this user group, the growth channels are really constrained.
Right.
So one that actually did make a lot of sense at the time was actually the crypto community.
Okay.
Not only were like I think over 50% of people in New York in the millennial of the millennial ages already in crypto. But yeah, it's a highly growing community. These people, the user behavior already exists of them meeting up,
Right.
and this could be then the centralized space for them to get to meet new people. So that made a lot of sense. And as I was pivoting towards that, when I made that decision, Omicron hit, and then I ran out of money.
Oh man.
Yeah, so that was rough. And so I put it on indefinite pause.
Okay.
And so no one could register for a new account. I actually just took it down from the server about a month ago. But I know like one day I will probably end up trying again. It's just a matter of when.
Right. That's a wild ride, and clearly you have some great stories. Whether if you found it, you're starting trying to find the person who started TikTok. That's crazy. So I mean, it's so unfortunate the timing, because it seemed like you're taking all the right steps of pivoting, iterating, and like you're really close to getting it. But yeah, I think for a lot of startups, COVID helped a lot because virtualization. In this case, it's obviously a pretty big killer. So hopefully in the future you can get to pursue it again.
Hope so. Yeah, just give me I think this time if I go again, I'm gonna have a little bit more runway because I was pretty cocky with it.
Right.
In a sense where I knew I had the product market fit. I thought the timing was right. I felt like all I needed was a little bit of growth, so I only gave myself like 5 or 6 months of runway to grow to get to the seed round.
Mm.
Now in hindsight, I know I should have raised more.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
that's something, of course, like, if you do end up joining it or you start your new startup, you'll definitely have those experiences. And I think that's one of the reasons why we see people who are ex-founders really succeed. I think a lot of people always think about the success stories like Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs, who really hit it off on their first company. But really the majority of really successful entrepreneurs are people who have gone through the iteration stage with multiple startups and then they finally hit.
Exactly. And just to add to that, I gotta say, I think that's really what makes Yiming, the founder of ByteDance, having succeeded in the way that he did, where he's actually able to constantly produce new, very, very successful products.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I look at Zuckerberg's story, right, like I know he did things like he made like a classroom website where like you can see like who's actually enrolled in like what classes at Harvard. I think he made a couple other products before he actually made Facebook. But I don't ever recall hearing a story of him failing. Whereas Yiming has failed several times. Even before ByteDance, he had a startup that failed. And then when ByteDance actually happened, he had one successful product, the news app. And then he had a second product, which is like an app where you can create jokes with your friends.
Okay.
But because it was kind of target, some of those jokes were hitting the government like shut him down pretty hard. And that was like, a very classic story of failure. Which of course he should have had more hindsight on. And I think, and even now, like ByteDance will continuously produce products that succeed and fail. But the fact that the founder himself really knows and has learned the process of iteration, the fact that and knowing that things take time is really, really key. And that's really what made Douyin succeed, right? Because what people don't know is that when Douyin got started, they had a very low number of users, and the retention rate was atrocious.
Mm-hmm.
Like people were just not sticking to the platform. And when I mean atrocious, I mean like some of the worst retention rates I've seen in a product after their first month.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyone in the right minds, right, at a typical bigger company, say for example Facebook, Google, Grab, etc., would have just said no, like we're not going to fund this anymore.
Yeah,
you've had 6 months, you have like no results, and this is just pointed to failure. But Yiming is very different. Like he will continue to invest and support if he really believes in it,
right?
The direction and everything else, and that's exactly what happened. Like with enough time, they kept, because the team was constantly iterating over and over again to like get it right. And eventually they found product market fit. And then what is public knowledge is like eventually they had the guy from the AI like this brilliant data scientist come in to make that amazing algorithm,
Right.
and that was timed in with with this creator concert that they held, which then got national attention within China. And then the two coming together at the same time, where I think it really scaled the supply side of the videos in tandem with the ever growing like awareness and demand that was generated from that concert, to help train that algorithm as it's getting better and more demand was coming in.
Right.
I think that was just like a timing thing. I don't think they planned that, but I think that was really what like made it skyrocket and succeed to like what it is today.
Right.
But that would have only happened with enough time and enough allowances and enough space to let the team really try to find product market fit. And I know people at like Meta, um, and other companies, where they say, we launched and after 1 month, our resourcing gets cut because the execs just deem it a failure.
Right.
But they themselves are not founders. They don't actually understand product market fit and how to get there.
Right. Yeah, I think a similar story that I recently read about was so Tony Fadell. He's the father of the iPod and the iPhone, and so he was talking about how there's the time at Apple when they were building the iPhone and a bunch of other execs wanted to shut it down, but Steve Jobs used to come in and shield them and keep funding it, and eventually that completely transformed the whole company. And it seems like it's a similar story in that way, where I'm sure there was a lot of people who were saying, no, we should just shut down TikTok, but it's the determination of a founder who's been there and knows it, that really puts it over the top.
Exactly. And honestly, I think any company to have that like leader with that mindset is in a pretty blessed position to be able to drive impact and innovation.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Well, let's talk about, so one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is that, you worked on, a whole bunch of different spaces, with Super Air Taxi, with flying cars or flying taxis, and, Grab is very different than ByteDance and Social City. So I was just wondering, like, when it comes to building skills in these areas, how do you go into these different domains and start coming up with a roadmap to try succeeding in it?
Right. Yeah, and now I'm in fintech, so
Yeah.
I'll say it like this. Um, in your PM career, you have two options. You can choose to be a specialist or a generalist. Now, at the time, I didn't really have a specific direction in mind. All I knew is that at the time I already had e-commerce experience. I had experience in manufacturing. Um, and then when I got into my more formalized role in product at Grab, I then got into trust and safety, so fraud. And I always knew that I wanted to break out of that and go back into a more consumer facing product and team. So I didn't expect, my experiences to be so diverse. But what I realized is that this is actually where I'm strongest and where I'm best. And it goes back to like when I actually did start my first company, Mint Ultimate. Like imagine you just pull out like a third year psych student and who has absolutely no experience in manufacturing, designing, running an e-commerce business or whatever.
Right.
And you just tell them to go start a sports e-commerce company, tomorrow.
Right.
That's exactly like the position I was held in, right? And I had no experience and I had to learn everything on my own. But as I started doing that more and more, I got more and more comfortable with being in that position. And now it's like any industry is familiar territory to me. So I go in, I'm not afraid at all. Like I know exactly what I need to do to ramp up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also just being in this like now like at this stage of life, I do have like more general knowledge across like different industries and fields already. But if I do happen to come across a new field that I am really really just like in the dark in, there's no longer any like concerns or fears that I would not be able to like ramp up and be able to build a roadmap around it.
Right.
I think the quickest thing you could do is actually just talk to people. You can do all the market research to get the facts, but like really just talking to people in the industry already will just save you so much time,
Right.
and experience that you lack. Um, right. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Sorry, can you just remind me of your initial question? I kind of like kind of forgot.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, it was just, you worked on different domains. So how do you ramp up in those different domains, or how do you ensure that you're being successful in those different domains? But I think you answered it very well. So no sweat.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. But I'll take it from you. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think I think there's a lot of people, including myself, like it's pretty daunting to go into a new industry. But once you make that jump, you'll realize that there's so many similarities, and that I think one of the biggest skills I've learned in my engineering degree or throughout my time is just the ability to learn quickly and be able to ramp up. And I think that is what the focus should be, just being able to learn quickly. And because what you start to realize that there's a lot of similarities from your previous experience that you can leverage, um, as long as you can put in the proper context of this new industry. So it makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. The steps are the same. The context is just different. And me as a generalist, and what I noticed throughout my career is that as I go back into the job market for the next opportunity, um, actually I'm starting to have way more of a competitive advantage. Um, in terms of because now I play both offense and defense. I have a broad range of skills and perspectives that really can contribute to a certain degree. I still am able to level up with each other position that I have, and more importantly, what I didn't realize is actually there's also a strong sense of defensibility with your career as a journalist.
Right.
That I didn't expect until I started to notice that later on. So, for example, if you're a specialist, right? Let's just say you're a specialist in like fintech or trust and safety. Um, it is really hard to move out of that segment after your second or third stint into that career. Um, Whereas as a generalist, like in a way, you're actually protected against the job market because you can kind of like just cookie cut fit yourself into pretty much any role.
Right.
And teams are more than willing to consider you because of your diverse experiences, and they know that you can just fit right in.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was actually listening to a podcast recently, and David Lieb, the product manager behind Google Photos, or the product mind behind Google Photos, that's what he was mentioning. That what he sees a lot of times is that the best product managers he's had the pleasure of working with come from completely different backgrounds from Google Photos. And I think that's sort of to what you're saying there. That sometimes being a generalist, because that's also where new ideas can come from. When you're not completely in the space, you can take ideas from industries that you might not even thought about, and it can completely change another industry. So that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, like I think one of the really unique things about your experience is that you have a lot of experience building products for the Asian market. And I'm in particular really interested in new Asian tech companies and Asian apps. I recently did a graduation trip a couple months ago, and I remember when I went to Singapore and Indonesia, I didn't realize how advanced everybody is there. Like Grab, I never heard of Grab before, and then the moment I got there and I used Grab and Gojek, it was insane the amount of functionality that was inside an application. We don't really have that many super apps in the West, but I can definitely see it translating if it's done properly in the West. Um, but anyway, coming back to my question, I was just wondering, like, Asia's rapidly innovating, and especially with the adoption of the smartphone, with almost all consumers in Asia, we see network effects on a whole nother level. So I was just wondering, like, when it comes to building for the Asian market, what really excites you with the Asian market, and what are some of your insights from there?
Okay, I have pretty strong views on the market here,
Okay.
to be frank.
Okay.
And a lot of it may not be positive.
Okay.
But I can go a little bit more into detail on this. I'm a little bit fuzzy on the actual data facts, so I'm gonna pop and botch this a little bit. I'm gonna speak more generally then. Basically, I wanna break this down in a couple parts. First is market opportunity. Second is with regards to founders, and then third is with regards to big tech.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with the market opportunity here. Now, Indonesia specifically is worth over 50% of the overall GDP of Southeast Asia. Um, that's huge, of course. However, and so people are touting Indonesia to be like the next India or China. However, I think if you just look at it from that perspective, it's wrong. And it's wrong for so many different reasons. Oh, by the way, it also has one of the fastest growing GDPs in the world. But actually, the fastest growing in this entire region is not Indonesia, it's Vietnam. And I'm way more bullish on Vietnam for several reasons. And I'll use that comparison between Vietnam and Indonesia. Indonesia lacks a few things. One is a stress on education for the general population. Two is the culture. Culture being, it has this certain degree of crime and fraud um, and and still, the majority of the population is really poor,
Right.
right? Even though they have high smartphone adoption, that doesn't mean that people are going to adopt your products. And just because
Right.
they're still very much cash based doesn't mean that they're going to adopt cashless. Like, so whenever I hear stories like, oh, like 90% of people in this country or whatever are unbanked, like we're going to break in like Meta's Libra into Southeast Asia, I always laugh because I already know the outcome of how that's going to go. And number one, they clearly have not been to that country or
Yeah.
understand the culture to really understand why that won't even work at first glance. And so for a lot of these reasons and more, right? And also like the overall level of talent, they're being on a much lower tier than what you would be familiar with in like SF, for example. And likewise, more importantly, and this is the most important thing to me, people from the West or like from from environments where you're really sparring with the world's best, it's crucial for them to contribute to the environment and the culture, to help level up the next playing field. And Indonesia is not a culture or a country that's comfortable for foreigners to go, especially those from the West, let alone China or any other country. Um, and I say that objectively. I have a lot of friends there, and I have a lot of respect for the people there. And I've worked with a lot of people there, and they're great. But that's just really the cold reality of it. But Vietnam is very, very different from all of these, right?
I see.
One, very, very highly educated. Two, I think aside from this one country in Africa, this actually has the second highest GDP growth in the world.
Oh wow.
Three, I think it actually has extremely high mobile and internet penetration, like 80 plus. 80% plus. And four, they actually have like a really strong tech ecosystem. Like, and I think one of the key ingredients that I've noticed in the past, when you're the backbone of the world for something, usually that creates a really good opportunity to go somewhere else.
Right.
So, for example, China was a manufacturing age, right? Even today, there's still like the backbone of the world in terms of manufacturing, but they've been able to leverage that income and opportunity into so much more, and now they're starting to lead by example, on areas like tech, AI, and so forth. And I look at Vietnam the exact same way.
Right.
So actually, what's going on there right now is people, of course, like what China was for the factory age, Vietnam is today for the IT age.
I see.
People are going there to develop products. People are going there for like to create shows like Attack on Titan and whatnot because the labor is really cheap, but they also have really good skilled workers. And then eventually they are going to lead by example. It is a culture that people like foreigners would love to go to and still go to today to go, work, travel, play. The food, the culture, the people. It's not only comfortable, but it can actually also be very familiar, which will continue to attract more foreign investment, more foreign expats to help level up the community overall. And they really do have this like. Now I think I don't see any country today that's going to ever be able to replicate Silicon Valley.
Right.
But I do see them making their own version of it because you talk to like a developer agency, they know a design agency will know X, Y, and Z people that can help you. The ecosystem is so strong and it's only going stronger. The only barrier that they've had is English. That is the only barrier that they had. But like when I was, for example, working at Social City and I had my contract designers and developers from Vietnam, like these guys are taking English classes.
Right.
And it's very, very common, like because they all know that they need that to upskill, to progress to the next stage of the market. And so that's my overall thoughts on it in terms of the market of Southeast Asia. I don't think it's Indonesia. And frankly, I think the rest of the countries are not going to succeed as well. But Vietnam has like the bigger shot.
I see.
And I think that's where foreign investment should really be going towards. The only concern is the government. I don't know too much about the government, but I've heard that the government can be a bit restrictive.
Right.
And maybe that's why we haven't seen like a huge. That could be one huge contributing reason for why we haven't seen like a huge breakout. So, okay, that's one. Second, let's talk about the founders within Southeast Asia. Frankly, they're not on the level of like Europe, let alone like the US.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of skill, knowledge, grit, and even just as something as simple as ambition, um, and creativity. And this is not just me with my own thoughts, having come here, but it's also a lot of feedback that I've gotten from other founders and VCs within the market. So, and they accept it. And to a certain degree, it's kind of fine, right? Um, the founder market here is very different. You'll have like a lot of rich kids get funded by their parents, or like use like family connections to like start a startup. Um, and there's many examples of companies that are there because of this. Um, Likewise, what's more prevalent is you have a lot of people just copying business models from the States and what really worked there, and then coming back to and then bringing those ideas to Southeast Asia and building like a company around it. Um, and every single time it's usually like a degraded version of that product,
Yeah.
which sometimes can be bewildering because if you're copying it, you can at least make it better, but it ends up being worse
Right.
in a lot more ways than one.
Or at least
Um,
localize it properly.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So, um, and like now the cat is out of the bag, right? Like e- every single startup here that even has succeeded, let alone just got funded, have very poor business metrics,
Mm.
business models, not profitable, gushing cash. Um, C Group and Grab, of course, being like the most notable examples, but I know of many startups here that have also just been in the same situation that are not even IPO. So that's the current situation with the founder market. And then lastly is the corporate market. So, and more specifically for the product management side of it. So, if your companies are headquartered here, right? Um, for example, like you're not like a Southeast Asian company like Pluong or Grab or C Group. So let's just say you're Netflix, Facebook, Google, whatever, and you come to Singapore, and all of them have APAC HQs here.
Right.
Very common pattern. None of them, none of them have core products here for the product teams to work on. Um, and I think there's a very clear, obvious reason for all the reasons that I mentioned before. The talent here is just not strong enough, so you can't trust them to actually work on it.
Right.
I mean, hell, even the directors don't even sit here. They still sit in the HQs in like California and whatnot.
Right.
So they're not even here. Um, and actually, what ends up being the case is a lot of the tech jobs here at those bigger companies are just internal tools or trust and safety.
Right.
Or it could be like customer service related, but it's not something like you're going to work on the actual homepage of TikTok. But it's not
Right.
going to be like you're actually going to work on the homepage or the Reels features of Instagram. None of that is actually here,
Right.
and it's like that for again like good reason.
Right. Yeah, I think it's really interesting hearing this perspective because I think in the West, all we hear about is Asia, like Asia's the next innovation market. Asia's where all the next entrepreneurs are coming from, and I think it's true to a degree. Like I think especially from China and India, there's some really like great innovation there. But I think in the process, what's happened is we've discredited how well the U.S. has built an innovation center, or Europe too. But I think especially the U.S. and how many, like even now, like a lot of the biggest products in the world, they all still come from the US. And I think we've
Yeah,
discredited that a little bit.
I totally agree. I'm very confident over the next 20 years, the US will definitely still be leading the pack in terms of skills and the IT market. I think China, and let's be real, right? With China, there's only one company that ever really broke out successfully internationally as a tech company. Actually, maybe two. One is Huawei,
Yeah.
but second is actually ByteDance.
Right. Right.
Yeah. But until I see more examples of companies like ByteDance really being able to break out successfully into like everyday into everyday usage in international markets, I would maybe want to hold off on that. But I do think that what they're building there is still very competitive, and again, leading actually in a lot of cases now. But in terms of international success, I think the US is going to still be dominating that for a very long time.
For sure. For sure. Well, thank you, Andrew, so much for coming onto the podcast. Before I let you go, two quick questions. First off, is there a book you recommend us reading or checking out?
Oh, okay. There is one book, but it's not really product related. It's
Okay.
one I'm reading right now. It's called The Seven Principles of Making Marriage Work by John Gottman.
Okay.
Now this is I think this is not I'm not married, by the way.
Okay.
But I think it's not something that you need to read while you're married. I think it just really helps relay a lot of insights into like how to make like a relationship work, because I just got into one.
Right.
But more so, it actually also derives like a lot of examples of how to make, I think, politicking work really well within your role.
Mhm.
Over, if I'm gonna maybe just give like one big lesson on that, don't criticize people in any circumstance. Just always try to make things work.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Well,
Okay.
I might check it out. I don't probably get married anytime soon, but it still might be a good read, so I might check it out. And yeah, so from there, like, what's next for you? What can we look forward to?
Yeah, for me, frankly, I'm still trying to figure that out. I think right now my goal is really clear. I'm just working my way up towards the career ladder, all the way up to CPO one day. So I think that career goal is really clear for me. I think right now I'm just taking a break from being a founder.
Right.
I'm not ruling that out that I'm ever going to be when I get in the future. But I think for now, there are just certain things that I'm looking for in my life that is more up the career track of continuing up the product management ladder.
Right. Makes sense. Well, thank you once again, Andrew, for coming onto the podcast. We loved hosting you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David.
Thanks.
Daivik.